When Princess Anne rose from her seat during a royal ceremony and delivered a thunderous defense of Diana right in front of Camilla and the world, it shattered royal protocol and sent shockwaves through the monarchy. What could have driven Anne to risk everything? The day had begun with the kind of pomp and ceremony the British monarchy excels at. A glittering hall, walls draped with banners of the realm, the air thick with hushed reverence. Yet beneath the grandeur, a tension simmered felt only by those who had lived too long in the palace's gilded shadows. All eyes fixed forward as the king began to speak, his voice steady, but the undercurrent of history vibrating through the room. And then, the unthinkable happened. Anne, seated to the left of the king, slowly stood up. At first, her motion seemed accidental, a rustle of her dress, a shifting of weight. But then she took another step, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The hall fell into an eerie silence. Centuries of unbroken decorum were about to collapse under the weight of one woman's conviction. Anne's voice carried like a whip through the silence, her words deliberate, defiant, and impossible to ignore. She interrupted the ceremony mid-sentence, leaving the king visibly startled, his mouth slightly open. Camilla, seated opposite Anne, stiffened as though struck. For a fleeting moment, she appeared to smirk, as if dismissing the interruption, but as Anne continued, the smirk melted into something closer to humiliation. Anne's eyes fixed on Camilla, with a fire that could not be contained, her voice rising as she invoked Diana's name, not as a memory, but as a warning, a haunting presence that still loomed over the monarchy's conscience. The stunned reaction of King Charles was matched by the rest of the senior royals, who could barely mask their shock. Gasps rippled through the room, whispers fluttering like restless birds as the press at the back began scribbling furiously. And then came the silence, a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the ornate hall whole. The air thickened as Anne's words echoed, Diana's name hanging like a sword above them all. Camilla, frozen in her chair, could only stare at Anne with wide, unblinking eyes, as though she understood, finally, that this was not just a breach of protocol, this was a reckoning. In the crowd, journalists exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing history being made not written by kings or queens, but carved by the steel of a sister's resolve. Their pens trembled, their cameras clicked, yet no one moved to stop her. But what invisible war had been raging beneath the surface, waiting to erupt into this unforgettable scene? Long before Anne's explosive stand, a quiet storm had been brewing between her and Camilla, one steeped in betrayal, loyalty, and unspoken rage. In the early days, when Camilla first entered the royal circle officially, Anne's reaction was nothing more than a cold glance and a polite nod. Icy indifference became her armor. She didn't need to shout or scowl. Her silence spoke volumes. To some, it seemed nothing more than formality. But to those who watched closely, it was the first crack in what would become an open rift. Anne never forgot her loyalty to Diana, and that loyalty, quiet but fierce, would become the fire that burned just beneath the surface. From the moment Camilla began to attend official functions, Anne's sharp eyes caught every gesture, every word, every calculated smile. Camilla, whether intentionally or instinctively, made subtle moves to step into the spaces Diana had once occupied, smiling graciously, as she assumed patronages that once belonged to the late princess, offering quiet remarks about the need to modernize the family's image, all while the echoes of Diana's name were pushed further into the shadows. Anne noticed it all. She noticed the portraits of Diana replaced, the charities redirected, the speeches that conveniently left Diana's name out. Camilla's ascent wasn't loud, but it was relentless, and it was cutting away at everything Diana had built. It was in the private moments, though, where Anne's disapproval could no longer be hidden. During family gatherings, when the laughter was meant to soften the room, Anne would deliver her rebukes in small, stinging doses. A dismissive look, a pointed remark that cut through the air. On more than one occasion, Camilla reportedly tried to engage her, offering compliments or anecdotes, only to be met with an arch of the brow and an abrupt change of subject. The frost between them was impossible to ignore. Behind closed doors, Anne's words grew sharper. Palace staff whispered scathing comments she'd made about Camilla, calling her a shadow wearing a crown, and accusing her of rewriting history. She spoke of Diana as though she was still in the room, reminding those around her that some memories couldn't, and shouldn't, be erased. There was no mistaking Anne's fierce loyalty to Diana, her sister-in-law in name, but her ally in spirit. To Anne, Camilla wasn't just a threat to tradition. She was an insult to Diana's suffering. Even in public, their quiet disdain occasionally surfaced. Photographers caught it in the way Anne's jaw tightened when Camilla entered a room, or the way her eyes narrowed during speeches where Diana's contributions were conveniently omitted. Those who knew nothing of their history would dismiss it as a fleeting moment, but those who knew the truth recognized it as an ongoing battle, one fought with glances, silence, and unyielding defiance. And yet, it wasn't just personal resentment. Anne's fury was rooted in something far deeper and darker. What few ever knew is that Princess Anne and Diana shared more than royal bloodlines. They shared whispered secrets, private tears, and a quiet alliance against the tides of the monarchy. At first, Anne had doubted her. In Diana's early days, as the shy, doe-eyed bride stepping into the royal spotlight, Anne regarded her with suspicion, even mild irritation. To Anne, Diana seemed fragile, ill-prepared for the brutal weight of royal life. But fragility, she would soon discover, was not weakness. It was a kind of courage Anne herself had never known. That realization came slowly, through countless moments when Diana's pain slipped through her smile, and Anne began to see not just a princess, but a woman fighting to keep her dignity amid suffocating scrutiny. It was during those difficult years that something unexpected blossomed between them. Private lunches in quiet corners of Kensington, where guards stood just beyond earshot, became their refuge. There, away from the relentless gaze of cameras, Diana could finally lower her mask, and Anne, who had never been known for warmth, surprised even herself by offering comfort. Letters passed between them, written in Anne's sharp, deliberate hand and Diana's softer script, spoke of longing, betrayal, and survival. In these quiet exchanges, they forged a bond that defied the cold hierarchy of the family around them. Anne, hardened by her own experience within the palace walls, began offering Diana advice on how to steel oneself, how to smile without surrendering, how to endure humiliation without letting it hollow you out. She warned Diana of the traps she herself had fallen into, of the dangers of trusting too freely. And though Diana listened, it was clear to Anne that no amount of guidance could fully protect her from the heartbreak that awaited. Through it all, Anne bore silent witness to Diana's anguish. The nights when she arrived for dinner only to find Diana's eyes red from crying. The mornings when Diana's voice cracked as she spoke of cold shoulders and whispered betrayals. She watched her sister-in-law unravel in slow motion. And though Anne rarely shed a tear herself, she carried Diana's pain like a stone in her chest. In the hushed hours of these private moments, Diana spoke of Camilla not with anger, but with quiet devastation. She revealed how she felt erased, how every gesture between Charles and Camilla was a dagger. Anne listened without judgment, but with a growing fury toward the woman who, in her mind, had stolen more than just a marriage. And so, deep within her heart, Anne made a silent promise. She would never let Diana's memory be tarnished, never allow her to be reduced to just another faded face in the royal gallery. She vowed to stand guard over her legacy, even if it meant standing alone. But Anne's quiet vow would soon clash with the royal family's relentless effort to rewrite Diana's place in history. As Camilla's influence grew, Anne watched in silent fury as Diana's portraits were taken down, her charities reassigned, and her memory seemingly swept aside. What once had been a palace still echoing with whispers of Diana's name began to transform, piece by piece, into a stage where Camilla's story would be rewritten as triumph rather than scandal. The softening of her image came first, carefully orchestrated by palace advisors who fed the press with tales of resilience, of quiet sacrifice, of love that had supposedly endured all odds. Newspapers that once condemned her now painted her as a woman wronged by history, while Diana's narrative faded further into shadows. Anne saw it happening at official events too, where Camilla stepped with practiced ease into roles Diana had once held. Charities Diana had championed were handed to Camilla without so much as a mention of the woman who had built them. The applause seemed to echo less with admiration than with obedience. And yet, to Anne, every smile Camilla offered, the cameras felt like another nail in the coffin of Diana's memory. Her discomfort could no longer be disguised. And when she condemned those responsible, her eyes locked on Camilla, leaving no doubt who she meant. Camilla's reaction was immediate and raw, caught between fury and humiliation. Her face tightened, her posture stiffened, but her silence betrayed her. The audience watched her hands tremble slightly as Anne's words continued to rain down, sparing nothing, sparing no one. King Charles shifted uncomfortably beside them, his expression darkening as he leaned forward, whispering for Anne to stop, to remember herself, to sit down before she destroyed them all. But Anne did not flinch. Then came the moment no one thought possible. Anne turned her entire body to face Camilla and said her name aloud, her full name in front of the cameras, in front of the world. The gasp that followed was deafening, a collective shock rippling through the room as the weight of her defiance landed. People who moments earlier had sat motionless now leaned forward, unable to look away, unwilling to blink in case they missed the next blow. And then there was applause. At first scattered, hesitant, then growing louder, surging into thunder. The sound rose like a wave, breaking over the royal family's carefully constructed silence. Anne stood in the center of it all, unbent, unashamed, as though the hall itself was finally speaking the words she had carried for years. Yet, even as she spoke, Anne knew the price she would pay for defying the crown so publicly. In the hours that followed, the palace descended into chaos. But outside its walls, the public hailed Anne as a hero for speaking the truth they had long felt. Inside, corridors once accustomed to quiet obedience now buzzed with frantic whispers and hurried footsteps. The royal family retreated into silence, refusing to release any official statement, as though silence could somehow erase the words that had already set the world ablaze. Advisors argued behind closed doors, but no one dared approach Anne directly. She moved through the halls with an unsettling calm, her expression unreadable, her resolve unshaken. Beyond the palace gates, the people surged. Crowds gathered, holding signs and chanting her name, their voices filling the cold night air with defiance. Flowers piled at the entrance, not just for Diana anymore, but for Anne, whose words had ignited something raw and undeniable in the nation's heart. It was as if she had ripped away the veil of ceremony and reminded them all that truth could still exist within these walls. Global headlines were ruthless and electrifying. Princess Anne breaks chains, one read. Another called it, the speech that shamed a crown. News anchors spoke in hushed but awed tones, replaying her fiery words again and again, while columnists condemned the monarchy for what they now openly called a cover-up of Diana's suffering. Suddenly, Anne was no longer just the stoic princess. They were calling her the conscience of the monarchy. Camilla reportedly left the palace in tears that very night, shielded from cameras but unable to hide the cracks in her facade. Whispers said she fled to a private estate, refusing to speak to anyone, her humiliation complete. Within the family, there were those who fumed, and those who watched in stunned silence, but Anne remained unshaken. Her demeanor stayed remarkably calm, yet there was a steel beneath it, a quiet defiance that even her critics couldn't pierce. She attended meetings as if nothing had happened, ignored the disapproving glares, and spoke when spoken to, never offering apologies. Even as rumors swirled of internal ultimatums and whispered threats, she carried herself with the same unflinching dignity she had displayed in the hall. And yet, perhaps the most profound consequence was not in Anne herself, but in the monarchy's fragile image. The carefully constructed facade began to fracture under the weight of public scrutiny. For the first time in decades, people were not just questioning the individuals who wore the crowns, but the institution itself. The illusion of unity and control was slipping, and the cracks were there for all to see. But the real question loomed. Would Anne be punished, or would her rebellion force a reckoning within the royal family? Behind closed doors, the monarchy weighed its next move. To silence Anne and risk outrage, or embrace her words and admit what they'd long denied. The room where the decision would be made was heavy with tension, its walls holding secrets too volatile to ever meet the public. Gathered around the table were the king, Camilla, William, and Anne, each of them carrying their own storms into that quiet, suffocating space. Camilla, still raw from the humiliation, spoke first, her voice sharp and shaking as she demanded a public apology from Anne. She insisted that the crown could not withstand such betrayal from within, that Anne's defiance had endangered everything they'd built. Anne, however, stood unmoved, her expression unreadable, her eyes locked on Camilla as she refused not once, but over and over to retract a single word. She reminded them all that what she had spoken was not slander but truth, that it was not her rebellion which fractured the family, but the family's silence in the face of its own cruelty. When Charles finally spoke, his words chilled the room to its core. Looking at his sister with an unfamiliar darkness in his gaze, he reportedly told her she had fractured the family beyond repair. But Anne didn't look away. And then came the most unexpected moment of all. William, who had been silent throughout the exchange, quietly leaned forward. In a voice that cut through the rising storm, he admitted that he supported Anne. He said her words, though painful, had been necessary, that it was time someone spoke aloud what they all knew. His declaration stunned the room into silence, even Camilla turning to look at him as though she hadn't truly seen him before that moment. Advisors flanked the corners of the room, exchanging uneasy glances as they whispered to one another, split down the middle over how to contain the damage. Some argued for Anne's immediate censure, believing any softness would embolden her further. Others warned that punishing her would only confirm everything she had said and ignite an even greater backlash from the public. For hours the debate raged, with voices rising and falling, and the crown itself seeming to teeter on the edge of collapse. But Anne did not falter, nor did she retreat. She stood as if carved from the very stone of the palace, unflinching under the weight of their fury. The family's unity, once unquestionable, now lay in shards scattered at their feet. And just when it seemed the family would implode, an unexpected twist reshaped everything. In the days that followed, Anne's rebellion sparked a quiet revolution, one that finally restored Diana's rightful place in the story of the monarchy. The impact was immediate and impossible to ignore. Across the nation, there was a sudden, almost fervent resurgence of interest in the charities and causes Diana had championed. Donations flooded in, volunteers signed up in record numbers, and Diana's name, once carefully diminished, was spoken with reverence again, now louder and more unapologetic than ever. Her story, long buried beneath layers of royal decorum, was being unearthed by a public that refused to let her memory fade. Within the palace walls, subtle but unmistakable changes began to unfold. Diana's portrait, which had been quietly removed from the main corridor years before, was restored to its rightful place, commanding the attention it had always deserved. The symbolism was not lost on those who walked past it, a silent acknowledgement that she had never truly left, no matter how hard others had tried to erase her. Even Camilla, once unstoppable in her ascent, was forced to take a step back. Her public appearances dwindled, her presence muted in a way it had never been before. Behind the scenes, she reportedly withdrew into herself, no longer able to command the room as she once had. The whispers grew louder of a woman wounded, of a crown slipping quietly from her grasp. For Anne, the shift was just as dramatic. At her next engagement, she was met not with polite applause, but with a thunderous standing ovation that refused to end. The crowd's cheers carried the weight of something far greater than gratitude. It was vindication, not just for Anne but for Diana too, and as Anne stood before them, she allowed herself the smallest smile. Through her eyes betrayed the years of pain it had taken to reach this moment. In the days that followed, whispers circulated in the highest corners of the palace that Anne's actions had even earned her the private respect of the Queen's memory. Some said that a letter, once written and locked away by the Queen herself, had resurfaced, acknowledging Anne's unyielding loyalty to family and to truth. Whether it was fact or merely legend no longer mattered. What mattered was that Diana's story had been reclaimed. And at the close of it all, Anne was heard to say, quietly but firmly, "For Diana, it was worth everything." Those words carried through the palace like a final declaration, a promise kept, a battle won, a sisterhood honored at last. And so, beneath the grandeur of the monarchy, the memory of two extraordinary women stood taller than any crown could ever hope to shine. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.